I was invited to an NRL community benefit match between Parramatta and the Penrith Panthers down in Bega.
You're a legend, Shane.
I do find it pretty uncomfortable to see that people want to get a photo with you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
But you know what? I also appreciate it's people's way of saying thank you.
And how did you fare with the fires, all right?
Shane has amazing rapport with people.
Absolutely, there was potential there.
I'm more of a rational thinker. He's probably a bit more emotional than I am. For someone who's so decisive and demonstrated such leadership, he's also incredibly compassionate.
Well, your attitude's going to get you all the way through.
Thank you.
Well done.
And that's why he has such a loyal following amongst the RFS volunteers.
Oh, yeah, that's good, that's good.
You can't lead an organisation of 70,000 volunteers and ask them to follow your instructions unless you've developed that rapport with the organisation. He certainly had done that.
Yeah, that's right. He's used to collect that.
They say the art of leadership is about trying to get people to go where they might otherwise be uncomfortable or unwilling to go, but together we know there's a benefit in heading down that path. So if you can't bring people with you in a volunteer organisation, you're in trouble. And the only way you can bring people with you is to garner the respect and garner the support that you're all in this together as a team.
Well done, mate. Thanks. Well done, two of you.
The virus crisis is something we're in the midst of as we speak. But there's no doubt that observing that level of resilience and stamina and clear thinking and calmness under pressure is something you can apply to every level of decision making, and I'm more prepared now than I would have been otherwise. And that's also a large part due to observing Shane and his leadership and his style. He would never ask anyone to do anything he wasn't prepared to do himself.
So it's spotted over to the west. If the backburn runs up to the main fire front, there's going to be, an ember explosion, and it probably cause a problem.
The thing that keeps me awake at night is our men and women out on the fireground doing risky jobs 24 hours a day. And the dreadful thought of getting a phone call and the advice that someone's seriously injured or killed.
They're saying got occupant out of property driving through flame.
A fire does not have to be big to be dangerous or deadly. Is it still mixing around, or is it starting to set in more west? When a local incident is escalating or conditions are deteriorating in the field, there's a light that flashes and a small bell that alerts people to know that there's an emergency call coming into the centre of the room. Redbow's here, Collington's in the middle. Yeah. So they're both increasing activity though.
Yeah, everything's starting to go off.
Obviously, there's a lot of focus, there's a lot of concern for the well-being of all that's in front of these fire paths and how aggressive these fires are burning.
That grid reference puts that fire right on this road already. If this fire's all the way down here, we need to get this upgraded now.
Oh, so this is that group of spotting?
I know what it's like to have a husband go off and fight a fire. Shane was a firefighter before he was a commissioner.
So there's a convergence here which is making sense because they're going to get...
Every moment they're out there, you're just waiting for them to come home.
Yeah, no, that's right. Yeah, cool.
I know what it's like to have that fear. Will they come home? I didn't know it at the time, but I probably came quite close to losing Shane in the 1994 fires.
Much of Sydney to the north and the south is ablaze tonight, and the city is nearly ringed by fire. More than 130 blazes rage, most of them are right out of control.
94 fires started out at Kringai National Park, and those fires throughout the state then were regarded as the worst fires in 50 years.
January 94 fires. I was a group officer at the time, and we found that we were being encircled by fire, so we became entrapped by fire.
Group 8 red.
Group 8.
Base 5 just tried to depart Laurel Road. The road out is impassable.
Copy.
Roger, there's two fronts moving towards us. Copy so far.
Copy.
I'm allowed to say shit, like it's like every firefighter. When you find yourself in that situation, it's like, wow.
Right, we are trapped. Copy.
Copy. Base to all units. Safety of all firefighters is paramount.
We just had to seek refuge, and I called in a red message. We're introducing colour codes at the time, and the team still takes the mickey out of me for that. But they still use the audio to this day for training.
Roger, I've got all vehicles as far south on that rock shelf as I can.
They say, despite what was unfolding, there was a calmness in my voice.
Both fronts are just making their way onto that last right-hand bend, over.
When you're on the radio and you hear a red message, that's a priority call, because the red message is either life-threatening or it's an emergency situation.
Group 8, red.
Go ahead, Group 8.
You're helpless at the other end of a radio. There's nothing you can do except hope that they've got their tanker protection on and they're safe.
Unfortunately, we didn't have the water reserve to run the sprinkler system. We had quite a few melted panels on the vehicles from radiant heat, but people just stayed inside the cabins of the vehicles. And yeah, we were fortunate, so we were okay.
Roger, for information, I'm just proceeding up the safe sector of Laurel Road just to check on other residents, over.
Copy, thanks, Group 8. Be careful, base clear.
Shane was very cool and calm and collected at what he did. He didn't rush into a decision. His training came to the fore. You could see it then. I could see a leadership in Shane that would benefit the movement overall.
The country is burning. It's been labelled the worst fire season ever recorded. What's been called an apocalypse, a nightmare looking like the gates of hell.
The house next door is alight, so this one.
So they're saying property's under threat on this road.
Yep.
So we need to think about the area.
Yeah, okay.
As I watched his performance during this fire season, it didn't surprise me. In fact, for once in my life, I was right about somebody, you know, so...
You're right. I've always regarded the RFS like a family. It's provided all sorts of love and support when I've needed it, but I've also seen absolute tragedy. I've also seen despair. So absolutely I'm driven by trying to make a difference for everybody, because everybody that goes out and volunteers, does extraordinary work in their community, deserves to go home. I grew up on the northern beaches of Sydney. Duffy's Forest, Terry Hills. Mum and Dad didn't own anything, they rented lots of places, but what came with that was a lot of adjustment and a simple life on small acreage, predominantly with horses.
Mum and Dad were married very young. Mum was 19 when she had Shane, and their relationship was lots of fighting. I remember little bits and pieces of it, not a lot. Mum had a great work ethic. She was all about honesty. Dad had different sides. He's lovely and he's really funny, but when Dad was drinking, I think whoever was in his path would cop his wrath, so to speak.
There was domestic violence, and that extended down through to us kids. Principally me as the oldest son, I think. Mum suffered injuries, and I remember as a kid when we'd talk to grandparents, we'd always, you know, be prosecuting the lie that Mum bumped into the door, or we were doing something in the tack room or something with the horses and, you know, she cut her eye or got a bruise on her arm or something like that.
Mum had had enough and that was it, decided to leave him. Really proud of her for moving on and changing all our lives, really.
I remember a particular night after Mum separated where it was quite challenging for my sisters and I, and it ended up getting quite physical and violent, and the police were called. And I remember the police lining us all up in the front yard, and we had to make a decision about who we wanted to go with and live with there and then. So, and I decided to go with Dad. I loved my dad, as complex, as messy as that relationship might have been. And I don't really know what drove my decision that day, other than a sense of loyalty from a son to a father.
They asked me, and I said, Dad, could Shane said, Dad. I didn't really know what was going on.
I think a lot of that was undone in the next 24 hours or so, 48 hours. My little sister went back with Mum, then I stayed with Dad. And so, yeah, little things like that do stick in your mind, and very, very difficult. As the years rolled on, I lived between Mum's place, Dad's place, and there's no doubt through high school I was mischievous, I was rebellious.
I don't think any of us thought there was a huge future, because he was quite aimless for a long time. Right here, Shane Fitzsimmons. Likes watching the sun go down, having relaxing barbecues. Comments on year 12. You'll be laughing. Shane was a very bright kid, but he didn't necessarily like school. When it came to reports, it was invariably Shane could work harder. If only Shane applied himself more, he could do so much better.
I remember in year 10, we went everywhere on our push bikes, and we had a big beanie dome back in our high school. We were there one weekend and we decided to take our push bikes up onto the roof of the beanie dome.
The building itself was probably 20 to 30 metres high, but right at the very, very top, of course, it's curved and it's highly dangerous and slippery. And he was riding his BMX bike around the top of this thing.
And I think, if the truth be known, we might have even paused and urinated on top of the beanie dome, because that's what we thought of school at the time. And unfortunately, we were caught, and we paid the price. I had my school desk set up outside the principal's office in the admin building for quite a bit of time. I wasn't allowed to have recess with everybody else or lunch. I wasn't allowed to get my school certificate presented along with the rest of the school. So little things like that were quite challenging.
It was customary in year 11 that every year did what was called the Rockesteadford. But true to form, he wouldn't listen to the instructions, obviously, by the choreographer. And in the end, he found himself literally cut from the team. And as far as I understand, a stepbrother, Brad, had to talk to one of the teachers to get him back.
Yeah, and he came and said his sorries, and, really sorry, just lost my cool, blah, blah, blah. Straight into the head roll. Straight into the star of the whole thing. And full credit to him, he did a fantastic job and pulled it off beautifully, as he always does.
On reflection, I have no doubt that I was a bit troubled, but I did find in my teenage years joining up as a volunteer, following my dad into the local bushfire brigade as it then was. It gave me a sense of belonging. There was a lot of mentoring. There was people to give you a clip around the ears when you were being a bit too cheeky or doing the wrong thing. But you were also empowered with some really serious and important things to do and to deliver on. I'm confident that I'm better for it. I could have certainly gone down a different path and ended up right off the rails. When I left high school, I went and did my apprenticeship as a mechanic, and I was working on the front desk as a service advisor, talking to customers. And a lady came in one day, and I cannot remember the name of the teacher, and she said, "Oh, Shane, I'm so pleased to see you've got a job. I was certain you'd be in jail by now."
I grew up with the Royal Fire Service. My dad was the fire control officer in Warringah.
Get off there, come on.
Shane's dad worked for my dad as part of the prevention crew. He'd often come to our house when his dad came round to pick something up, and we got on well. We used to muck around and have fun.
There was obviously an attraction, but I think Shane got in our place a feeling of home, homeliness that maybe he didn't, unfortunately, have in his own environment. Shane did actually pluck up the courage. He was about, I think, 16 and a half, 17, to ask Lisa out. And he took a deep breath and asked Lisa, would she come to the dance with him next Saturday night? At which point she looked him in the eye very rudely and said no, and ran out of the room. He hung around still a long time, and then by the time she was about 15 and a half, they had started dating.
I do remember in the early days when Lisa's mum and dad used to look after fire control after hours, which was all the radio networks in the home. And I remember Lisa venting to her mum and dad one night, you know, I'm never going to get involved with anyone in this bloody organisation. It just takes over your life.
And I did say I will never marry a guy in the fire service because it was very time consuming. At that time he was only a mechanic though, he wasn't the commissioner.
When I first joined Duffy's Forest Brigade, George, his father, was captain. George was very experienced in the fire world, and I think he passed a lot of that on to Shane. But it was obvious there was some issues there.
One of the nights there, you know, Dad had had a few too many to drink and we ended up having some pretty serious issues, and one of those was a physical altercation. I found myself in this position as one of the deputy captains where they were saying enough's enough.
Shane and the other deputies were chafing under George's, shall we say, micromanagement. I was asked to go down and mediate between them and sort it out, which I did. In fact, he was one of the main speakers against what George was doing, which showed an honesty which impressed me. So I came away thinking, oh, that young man was really good.
When actually Dad moved on and left the brigade, I found myself being elected as the captain of the brigade by the fellow members, which was really interesting because I was 19 years old at the time, and back then I was the youngest member ever elected as captain.
He didn't particularly like being a mechanic. He didn't like getting his hands in oil and grease. So he showed an interest in moving from the volunteer side to head office. And next thing he was employed, of all things, under my control.
He learnt a lot from my dad, and my dad definitely was the reason that Shane entered the Rural Fire Service as a profession. He encouraged him to apply for positions and supported his decisions, and the rest is history, really. Shane did have a difficult relationship with his father, and at Shane's 21st birthday they had a significant incident. Shane's dad did have too much to drink and he said some inappropriate things.
George was less than respectful to not only his own family but to us, and even to the people that attended the 21st birthday party.
It got ugly and Shane said, I don't want to have anything to do with you anymore. He didn't come to our wedding. He didn't speak to his father for about 7 years. But then when I fell pregnant with our first daughter, I thought George deserved to know. I was always worried that something would happen and Shane would feel guilty if he hadn't reconciled with his dad.
And I'm so glad we did. It was never the same, but in a way it was better because I think Dad made an effort much more as a grandfather than he did as a father. And deep down, I think my dad did do his best as a parent. Dad had actually secured employment with national parks, specialising in fire trail maintenance and construction and prevention work. And then I remember it very clearly on the 8th of June 2000, in the early afternoon, we got reports of serious injuries to firefighters. Turned out to be a national parks doing a prescribed burn. When I checked that Dad was at work, I tried ringing his mobile phone quite a bit and it just kept going, ringing out and going to voicemail. And I remember the poor bugger, the National Parks manager at the time, said, "Where's Dad?" And he said, "Oh mate, I can't tell you." And I ended up having a very blunt conversation. I said, "You need to tell me." And he said, "I'm sorry mate." He said, "Your dad's on the mountain and he didn't make it."
A solemn morning in Mount Ku-ring-gai after a day and long night of tragedy. 25-year-old Claire Dean, 51-year-old Eric Furland and 52-year-old George Fitzsimmons were killed. It appears they scrambled up a steep hill to escape the oncoming flames.
Wouldn't have expected George to be in that situation. He'd had so much experience, and I mean, to have such a wind shift come through and be caught in a canyon, I mean, I don't know full details, but I heard he threw himself over the other people to try and save them, and that's the sort of guy he was.
To this day, I would just love 5 minutes to be able to speak to my dad and find out what happened in those last minutes. I loved him dearly, and I found it very difficult.
Dad was also very fond of Lisa and loved her.
I was an assistant commissioner, but there was a moment where I decided to give it all away. I thought, if this can happen to Dad, then this can happen to anybody. Why am I in this game? But then I also formed the view that I think that's pretty pathetic, because I don't want to be one of those people that sit on the sideline and pontificate, and you can get in and have a go and try and make a difference. And I've tried to do that with everything I've ever done in life, and I've certainly tried to do that following that awful tragedy that affected us personally as a family.
And it certainly had its impact on Shane over years to come, in a positive way. Shane really thinks of all the people within the Royal Fire Service as family. I think that comes through pretty strong. He wants to see everyone get home.
Parts of New South Wales are in the grips of a bushfire emergency tonight, with at least 2 homes already lost in the state's north.
Police have confirmed the bodies of an elderly couple were found in their home.
It's a tragic outcome, but a sobering reminder of the ferocity.
Years of drought have laid the groundwork for a worrying fire season.
I think it's fair to say we knew this season was going to be another potentially difficult fire season. The drought is absolutely driving much of what's occurring across rural and regional areas of New South Wales, but we didn't see it just constantly building so uninterrupted month after month after month.
Scenes which have been described as apocalyptic. Hundreds of crews are still battling more than 90 fires which remain uncontained.
Good morning, everybody. As we feared, it was a very long night for many, many residents across New South Wales. I've made a very conscious decision early on to allow the expert, which was Shane, to not only advise me but be the principal person who was able to communicate that message. Our mission during the night, our absolute preoccupation has been to save human life, and I want to thank. But I remember initially he was kind of dragging me to the press conferences with him, and I said, Shane, you're the expert. People will listen to you. They're less likely to listen to me. But then on his advice, he said, no, Premier, the two of us together. Commissioner?
Thank you, Premier. As the Premier indicated,
those press conferences were just unmissable. And Shane was so organised. When he spoke with authority. He was concise.
It's indicative of volatile, dynamic, changing fire grounds.
He knew his way round the fire fronts.
In accordance with their plan.
And he imbued confidence.
Can I just commend and praise the firefighters, the emergency services. The effort yesterday was quite remarkable.
Shane felt this intense sense of responsibility. Every time a volunteer goes out there, it's almost like your brother or your sister or your mum or your dad that's going out there. And eventually I felt that deep level of angst, because every time you do make a decision, you're putting human beings on the line.
2 rural fire service volunteers have made the ultimate sacrifice. They were killed late last night while fighting a blaze southwest of Sydney.
So on the evening of the 19th of December, I'd only just got home. My phone rang, and it was just before midnight, and I could see that it was Deputy Commissioner Rob Rogers, and he said, we've got 2 fatalities, multiple injuries.
He just said, I can't believe this has happened. I can't cope with the fact that we've lost firefighters.
I just packed my bag and responded straight down to the Buxton area and attended the scene.
2 volunteers, Andrew O'Dwyer and Jeff Keaton from Western Sydney, were travelling in a convoy on Wilson Drive in Buxton when their fire truck flipped, killing both men.
When Shane arrived, I still remember it now, he had his red tabard on, Rural Fire Service Commissioner across the front. He walked up and gave me a hug, and then straight away we're talking about, we need to look after the families.
There's something very special about families inviting you in, letting you in to what is a very sacred space where people are processing the worst imaginable news that they can be given.
It's the respect that it shows to families, at 4 o'clock in the morning, when everyone should be asleep, the head of our agency, the commissioner, was with these families, and for them, doesn't need words.
I made a phone call to Lisa after leaving the two families, and we had a conversation together, we had a cry together, but I knew I had to get back and get cleaned up. We had media commitments and press conferences that were going to happen just in a couple of hours.
Shane's been more emotional this season than I've ever seen before, but I worry, is that the sign of cracks appearing, or is it just him accepting that it's okay to be vulnerable? But when Shane got the call about Sam, he rang me straight away, and immediately I knew something was wrong. I said, "What is it?" And he just started to cry. He actually didn't say anything at first. He was extremely emotional, and I knew that he'd lost another firefighter.
Samuel McPaul was killed when freak winds flipped his fire truck near the border with Victoria.
This freakish weather event that would have to be seen to be believed literally picked up an 8-tonne truck and flipped it over.
We ended up spending time with the crews and getting a sense of what happened at the accident scene, and we also went back to see Megan and her family. You get all the raw emotion, but pragmatic questions surface about paying bills, paying mortgages, what next? Sam McPaul, he leaves behind, tragically, a beautiful wife, Megan, who is pregnant with their first child that's due on the 4th of May.
Today has been absolutely extraordinary. I've covered plenty of bushfires. I have never experienced anything like this.
By that stage, we were then at New Year's Eve, where we saw horrendous fires impacting and devastating communities down through the south coast.
Batemans Bay has just ascended into darkness. Right here near the water is the place that we've been advised to come to.
It was awful, just awful. We are aware of heavy tolls in terms of damage and destruction.
On advice of Commissioner Fitzsimmons, New South Wales will be in a state of emergency from today.
We made the conscious decision to evacuate tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people out of the south coast of New South Wales. Unfortunately, we've seen this afternoon fire activity flare up, which has impacted the Princes Highway, which we're hoping to have wrapped up in the next few hours so we can again provide clear passage.
The strength of character to, in essence, instruct tens of thousands of people to leave their holiday destination when there was wildfires in areas which people had to travel through. That's a tough call. He made it. He saved hundreds of lives. And if he hadn't, God only knows what we'd be talking about right now.
Now, this is the zone fire authorities are concerned about. The entire south coast is under threat, stretching from the Victoria border.
We were having a truly awful week on what was already a truly awful fire season.
And the Prime Minister has just issued an emergency call-out mobilising 3,000 Army reservists to join the fight against the fires.
And we were completely blindsided by this federal government announcement of activating reservists.
The priority of this deployment is to assist ensuring the safety of life, to support the evacuation.
And the only reason we found out about it was through media reports coming through on the TV. And I walked out into the back room where the Minister for Emergency Services was and the Premier was, and I said, "Do you guys know anything about this announcement?" And they said, "Shane, we've just got a call a few minutes ago about activating this. We've got a copy of the press release. Feel free to watch it with us." That was the consultation, that was the advice, which I said very publicly was atrocious.
Did you know that an announcement was going to happen?
No, unfortunately not. And I've spoken to the PM's office again last night. I've spoken with our state leaders. It's disappointing on one of our worst days this season to hear that announcement. The call out of the reservists was a good thing, but the timing of it couldn't have been worse.
I don't begrudge him for expressing what he did. Shane says it like it is. When you're on the front line making operational decisions, you feel you need to know everything to be able to make those decisions appropriately. He doesn't say what people want to hear, he speaks the truth.
long 6 months for all of us, and we've been entirely focused on one thing, and that's trying to do the very best we can.
He has seen us through the biggest natural disaster in scale in the nation's history. The Royal Fire Service, they're involved in saving over 15,000 homes. He has more politics swirling around him than being in state parliament or national parliament, and he's able to see straight through it.
I have been absolutely in awe of the collective effort of everyone that came together this fire season.
I'm sure you closed the cabinet when you last one.
The volunteer cohort, they're a critical part of the social fabric. Whether it's emergency services, whether it's anything else, find something in your community that works and works well, you'll find it's underpinned by volunteers.
Hang on tight.
Being paid doesn't make you professional.
Keep making sure you use the different nozzles.
Volunteers, all they want to do is make sure that they're respected and valued for what they do. I've been doing the Commissioner's role now for over a decade, and I thought it was time for change and for renewal.
The New South Wales Government is very pleased to announce that Commissioner Fitzsimmons has accepted the responsibility of being our Commissioner for New South Wales Resilience. That will ensure New South Wales is prepared but also able to recover through major crises.
I could have rationalised all sorts of reasons why I wanted to stay, and I love the organisation, I love the people dearly. But I knew deep down that it was the right thing to do. But it was also, without a doubt, the hardest decision to make, because the organisation's been a massive part of my life over 35 years. What we went through this year was a tough ask on everybody. Thank you to the families for sharing their family member with us in the RFS, because without that sacrifice and without that support, we simply couldn't function. So I say the same to you, Liz.
I don't know anything other than him being an RFS. I don't know him in anything other than a uniform. It is our family. And I don't want it to look as though either of us are deserting that family. I think of it as a positive thing for Shane and the service as a whole, because he will be looking after recovery, which is definitely an area that has been neglected over the years. So I think it's going to be a challenge for him. And I tell you, after 27 years of marriage, I'm looking forward to a summer holiday.